Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Welcome back to our course on collecting smartphone sensor data using iOS. In part 4 of the second module, we'll be looking at the core location framework, specifically how to initialize it and then how to ask the user for authorization to use it. Now, the core location framework is similar to the core motion framework we did for motion sensors. Namely, we start by importing the core location framework. We then create an instance of the location manager. We initialize the location manager. Specifically, we tell it what type of distance filter to use, which means what's the minimum distance we need to move before an update is generated. And in this case, there's only one choice, and that is none, meaning we update it anytime the location is changed. And also we set the desired accuracy, which again is, if we were to say set it to a kilometer, then we would only get an update when the kilometer has changed. In our case, we're going to just ask for the best possible accuracy, so we get maximum updates. Then once we've initialized the manager, we would then start the updates with one method call and stop them with another method call. And all of this is documented along with a lot more about the core location framework at this link below. Now, the one thing we still need to do and kind of intermix with this is the checking for authorization, which is a second step that we need to do. But first, let's look at the code for initializing it. So again, we'll import the core location framework. Here we create a variable of type core location manager, which will hold our local location manager. And then here are our three methods we'll implement for initializing, starting, and stopping the location updates. Specifically in the initialize location, which we'll call once from view.didLoad, create our location manager instance and set the initial parameters. Then to start location updates, we just make one method call to our location manager, and likewise to stop location updates, we just make this one method call. And those will be called when we tap start and tap stop in our app. Now, there's a few more things we're going to need to add to these to handle that authorization step. But for now, let's go ahead and put these in to get us started. So I'll get out of my presentation, and I'm going to copy this code. And then we'll go into Xcode and load our app. We'll go into the view controller.swift file, and I'm going to go up to the top here and import core location. And then here I will put in the variable for the local location manager. And then down here, I guess below where we handle the motion, I'm going to put in a little comment for location handling, and we'll start adding our code here. See, I already initialized the location manager variable, and it looks like I got a little extra space in here, copied from the notes. Okay, so those are our three main functions for initializing, starting, and stopping. And of course, we want to call those. So inside view.didLoad, I'll be calling the initialize location. And then inside the actions for start tapped, I'll call these start location updates. And for the stop tapped, I'll call these stop location updates. Okay, so now if we were to run this now, nothing would happen because, again, we haven't asked for authorization and we won't be able to access the location information. So let's go back to the notes and see how to do that. Okay, so for authorization, there's two things that we're going to do. One is we're going to check if the location services are enabled. Now, to do this, we need to distinguish between two different location managers. The device itself has a global location manager that all the apps use to check for certain things, like are the location services enabled. And we just saw that our app initialized a local instance of the location manager. And so we'll be using both of these. For the global shared instance, we will be using that to call the location services enabled to see if they are enabled. And we're also going to use a method called authorization status, which tells us whether we're authorized to use the location services. Now this method returns one of 5 different possible responses. The first possibility, the first two are authorized always and authorized when in use. So those are good for us. That means we can access the location services. Now if the user has denied our request or they've turned off the access through the privacy settings, then we're going to get a denied or a restricted, which means we shouldn't try to access location services. And the last type is not determined. That means that we haven't even asked the user yet. In other words, this pop-up alert hasn't shown up yet for the user to approve or deny our access. Now, if in fact this authorization status does come back as not determined, then that's when we'll call this method, which is the request when in use authorization. And that is the request that will generate this pop-up and ask the user if we have authorization or not. So let's see how to add that into our code. So the main changes we're going to make are right here in initialize location. So you can see first we're checking to see if the location services are enabled through the global shared instance of the location manager. If they are enabled, then again we use the global shared instance to ask for the authorization status. Now, for the initialization section, all we really care about at this point is whether we should ask for authorization, because we're only going to call this once from view-did-load. So if the status is not determined, then that means we haven't asked the user for permission yet, so we call the request when in use authorization of our local location manager. The other change that we'll make to the code is in the start location updates. Before, we just made a call to the start updating location, but we should actually check to make sure that we're able to do that. So again, we're going to check to see if the location services are enabled before we do that. And we're also going to check the authorization status. Now here, we want to make sure that we're authorized to use it. So we want either authorization to be always or when in use. And if either of those are the case, this is an or, logical or. If either of those are the case, then we have access and we can start up the sensors. Again, remember that we should never start up sensors if we're not going to use them, and we should turn them off when we're done, because they do use a lot of power and we don't want to drain the battery. Okay, well let's go back into Xcode and add this code in, and then we can actually run the app and see the request be made to the user. Okay, so I'm going to grab this part of our new initialized location, and we'll go into Xcode. And in the down here in the location handling section, I will add in this code. Again, I've got a few extraneous spaces in here. Unfortunately, these spaces in PowerPoint are not the same as the ones that are used in Xcode, so we have to get rid of those. And I'll redo that. Oops, didn't want to run that yet. Let me stop that. Okay, so we've added in our test to see whether location services are enabled and if we're authorized to use them. And of course, if we're not, then we will ask for authorization. Get out of this real quick. And then the second piece of code we wanted was to change the start location updates to also check to make sure that we have authorization to do that. Get rid of the spaces here. And a handy little keystroke is the Control-I, which I use to reformat things once I get rid of all these spaces. So if your indenting gets a little messed up, you can hit Control-I and it'll re-indent whatever section you've selected. Okay, so again, this will, when we're about to start the location update, so this is when we hit the start button in our app and we want to start the location updates. It once again checks, make sure we have authorization to do so. And if we don't, then it just won't start them. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. Specifically, we'll see that request pop up. Scale this down a little bit. Okay, so our sensor app came up, and as you can see, it now asks us, realizes we want access to the location services, and it asks the user for permission. And it displays the reason that we typed in. So I'm going to click Allow here, and at this point, I could click Start, but as you can see, we haven't added the code in yet that handles the location updates, so nothing is happening. So that's the next step, is to figure out how to actually get the location updates and display them on the screen. So let me stop that and we'll go back into our notes. So in this part we saw how to initialize the core location framework, and the first step, actually the second step in authorization from the user. Later on we'll look at how to handle the case where the user changes that authorization while the app is running. And we made the updates to the sensor app to start up the location framework. So the next part is we want to be able to get the location updates. And this is going to require us to learn a new capability in iOS called delegation. So we'll do that in the next part.